Welcome to episode 178 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriting career coach Lee Jessup. She just wrote a book where she interviewed a number of working screenwriters, and we go through some of the important insights that she gained while working on the book. It's a great interview, and there's tons of insight into a wide range of screenwriting topics, so stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 178. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing screenwriting career coach Lee Jessup. Here is the interview. Welcome, Lee, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking with me today.
Pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
So you've been on the podcast twice before, and I would encourage people to check out those episodes. It's episode number 14 and 91. I will link to those in the show notes. I thought what might be interesting as a start for today's conversation is just to kind of get your perspective, kind of a state of the union on screenwriting. And maybe we can start out with TV. We can do one for TV and one for features, and maybe just sort of an overview. And then we'll dig into your book. And I know your book probably covers a lot of this too. So maybe just a kind of an update or kind of a current trends that you see in both of the different sections.
Well, we just survived the threatened writer strike. So, it's a good moment, and that strike didn't happen. Past strikes have not been particularly good for anybody. So it's great to see that TV writers got what they wanted, feature writers less so. But really to see this industry continue to chug forward. We are, as we all know, in the golden age of television, peak TV as it is known. So it's great to see this continued growth. It's really anticipated to go until 2019 at the least. On the feature side, it's great if you're a feature writer repped by Paradigm right now. They're moving a lot of product, but we're also seeing Sean Barkley with a spec sale. So we are seeing some material move on the market. We saw the end of April with a bit of a fire sale mentality as agents were getting material out there. Managers were trying to get everything they could off their shelves, and equally studios and production companies were trying to lock down some deals should this strike happen. Luckily, it was averted. Now it's back to business as usual. Of course, business as usual continues to bear a question mark as usual here changes year to year, month to month, and sometimes day to day. So cord cutting continues to be an interesting influence on scripted television, on the growth of studios and the corporations that own them. So we're waiting to see where this goes. Of course, new media continues to grow. All in all, it's not a bad time to be a screenwriter.
Yeah, I think that's a good summation. So let's dig into your book. You have a new book coming out called Breaking In, and it's a fascinating book. You do a lot of interviews. There's a lot of excerpts from various people in the industry, and I would encourage people to check it out because it's even called Tales from the Screenwriting Trenches, and I think that's a good summation of it because you've got a lot of real working people. Maybe to start out, you can just give us a quick overview of the book, kind of tell us what it's all about, maybe the logline or pitch for the book.
Sure. What I was really interested in is learning what writers are doing these days breaking in, right? We hear people talk about the 2008 strike, the strike that changed everything, how everything is different now than it was then. And so it was really my cause to get out there and start talking to different writers who are working writers today, nose to the grindstone, boots on the ground, doing that hard work to find out how they got there, what they did, and also collect advice from agents, managers, executives about what it takes, what is the state of the industry, what are the expectations, what is it like out there, what's expected of the writer, what is the journey to selling a pilot, to selling a spec, so that people can start gaining a real understanding of how it works to be a screenwriter in the space, as opposed to live vicariously through the fantasies of people who have made it 20 years ago when the industry was very different.
Yeah. So I'm just going to knock through a couple of these chapters. You have different chapters divided up into different sections. And one of the sections you have is on craft. Maybe you can just give us a few highlights. Again, you have a ton of quotes from various people. Were there some things that surprised you that came back when you're talking about the craft and some of the quotes, some of the people you talked to? Was there any advice that came back from these experts that surprised you?
It wasn't so much that it surprised me as it delighted me to continue to hear that what it boils down to craft-wise is really great storytelling, right? There was less of a hunger for gimmicks and interesting, different for the sake of interesting and different, but just really more of a search for great craft, great writing. And it's great to know that even in this day and age where, on occasion I'll talk to writers who will say, well, I still write 3-act, and I know it's not conventional, traditional anymore, but that's what I do. That really it is about the 3-act, or the 4-act for features, that it is about original, interesting, different story writing that is telling us great stories. I think that we're seeing that reflected in the market today in terms of how much we're mining on the feature side, true stories that are period pieces that, 5-10 years ago, period pieces were persona non grata, for lack of better terms. Today, there's, any place that you can turn to uncover that great story. I think people get really jazzed, really excited. And, the other thing that I realized as I talked to these people is that when I talked to agents and managers, they were talking about finding the lifelong storyteller, somebody who has a million stories to tell as opposed to a guy with a story. So really looking at writers who are looking to build towards those 10,000 hours to mastery, that's inspiring to people.
I'm curious, and you bring up an interesting point. I get a lot of emails, as I'm sure you do, from the guy with a story. And what advice do you give them? I often give them, I think, similar advice to what you're kind of saying, that screenwriting is really not about writing a screenplay, it's about writing screenplays. But what do you tell people when because sometimes I get someone, they've had a whole career, they've had a family, they're in their 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, and they've got one script and they don't want to pursue it as a career, but they feel like they have this one story. What is your advice to them, if any?
If it's this highly marketable concept and it's brilliantly written, right? And this is one of the changes that we've seen from the 90s to today, right? 90s concept was king. Today it's all about the execution. So for a script to gain traction in this space, it has to be brilliantly executed. If you are able to brilliantly execute it, and there's, it's a story that leans on pre-existing IP or is so unique and different that it will be easy to make a worthwhile sale for an agent rather quickly, great, go nuts. But short of that, I say one of two options. One, write the book. Two, find a way to go make the movie. Because you're not looking to be a screenwriter. You're looking to tell a story in the visual medium, which is very, very different than being a screenwriter who is a guy or a girl, a person who churns out a lot of material, good stuff, bad stuff, mediocre stuff over years and years. So for me, certainly enter contests, do all of those things to see if you can surface it to the industry. But if you find that you are submitting your material to contests, nothing is happening, what you want to do is see, can I make it myself? Do I know people who are in the film space, in the indie space, somebody who might want to direct it, somebody who can come on board to produce it? Because you're just trying to get that one story told, or else go write the book. Yeah, is that what you tell them?
Yeah, honestly, that is very similar. And I tell them basically raise the money, because ultimately that's what it's going to come down to, is go out and raise the money yourself, because once you have the money, you can find experienced people to produce it and whatnot. So was there anything, going back to this chapter on craft, was there anything that every screenwriter should understand but you feel like they don't? I think the issues on craft are probably, everyone knows kind of that we have to have a good script. But are there any things that kind of floated back to you that you say, man, a lot of new writers are missing this?
Well, Well, Ryan Saul over at APA told me, like, tell first-time writers, like, write the first script, then burn it. Go write the second, go write the third. Okay, maybe you didn't burn the first, so you can take what you learned from the third and apply it. Chris Cook, who's a manager over at Skyway, spoke about a team of writers, a famous team of writers, who set out to write 5 screenplays in the hopes of finding 2 that will be worthwhile. So it is about working the craft. It is not sexy. It is not cute. But you got to put in those hours. And without those hours, the enthusiasm that you'll be able to muster is not going to be as significant as you want it to be. Now, some writers are born writers, right? They are born just able to wordsmith a little bit prettier, to understand story and structure innately in a way that others have to learn. And sure, there are differences there, but we want to see you putting in those hours. And that's why so many agents and managers speak to screenwriting programs, MFA programs, not so much about how much you'll learn to write, but about the fact that you'll put your butt in the seat and you will churn in new work every 8, 10, 12 weeks. And that ultimately is what will lead you to great writing.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a chapter on breaking in. Let's talk about that a little bit. One of the things you talk about in that chapter is this idea of building your personal brand. Maybe you can kind of define that for the listeners. What is the personal brand, and how does someone kind of create that for themselves?
Sure. So when you're a writer and you're trying to surface in the industry, everybody wants to know what you do. And so you have to understand what your brand is as a writer in terms of the material that you're writing. So what space, what genre, what is the world you're writing in? If you are a thriller writer, we want to know. If you're a comedy writer, we want to know. If you're a comedy writer, for example, you need to supplement your education with sketch, with stand-up, with improv. So you need to really create a cohesive image of writer by creating the body of work, as well as creating a strong personal narrative that allows you to connect yourself to the material that you're writing, so that it's no longer, is the material good, but is this the writer for this very exciting concept? And you tie that in through your personal story as a writer. Your first story to tell is your own. So you have to find a way that connects it in a cohesive fashion to what it is that you're writing. So if you tell us a story about the, very depressing life that you had growing up in a very morose and dark tone, and then share with us that you write comedies, probably going to be a little bit confusing. I'm probably not going to, if I'm a manager or an agent, I'm probably not going to rush to put you in the room because you're not going to get people laughing. But if you tell me about the mishaps of your childhood and all the near disasters that you got into and hilariously found your way out of, perhaps I'm going to become that much more excited about reading you and putting you in front of people who will be excited about getting in business with you, the content creator. And then it's a matter of time finding the right piece, whether you originate that piece or that piece ends up being an assignment.
So you're talking about kind of a personal narrative when you're in like meetings or you're meeting people to kind of your background. That's correct. That would be something that would be like a polished piece that a writer would think about. Like when I'm talking to these executives, I have a 3-minute spiel about how I grew up in this, hilarious family. Is that kind of the gist of it?
Yeah, it's about finding a way to connect your story and who you are to the work that you're doing. So effectively, the life experiences that you have collected, or particularly 1 or 2 life experiences, now inform the material that you're writing, the characters that you're excited about. In television, it's going to be thematic choices. So it's really not only, is this a great script that I'm telling you about, but am I the right writer for this script that I'm telling you about, or for this logline that I'm pitching you, or for this show that you are proposing that I'm potentially being considered for to staff. How am I the right writer? Not only how do I have the right chops? And that's about understanding the writer as a business onto himself or herself, and understanding that executives, agents, managers, showrunners, producers make business choices every day. And it's about being able to present yourself and your business in a cohesive fashion.
And so just on but on a tactical level, what does that actually mean? Are you talking about meetings? Are you talking about query letters? Are you talking about,
Everything. Meetings, query letters, 5 minutes at a cocktail hour. Just the way that you present yourself.
Okay.
Of course, it's going to be more elaborate in general meetings and in showrunner meetings. but you should understand how to speak about yourself so that that is available to you should you run into an executive at a WGA Foundation event or at the Final Draft Awards, and be able to very quickly connect on that.
Okay. And is there ever any backing out of this? Like, have writers gone down this road where they've written a bunch of scripts, they've created this brand, maybe not had a ton of success, but they've had those meetings, but just haven't quite broken in? Can you back away from that and move from comedy to horror or something, or vice versa? What is the options there if it's not working?
I find that initially writers will try their hand, or smart writers will try their hands at a few different things if they're not quite sure. They know they want to write, but they're not quite sure where their voice is best suited. So they might try their hand at a comedy and a thriller and a drama and really see where they're happiest, where it's just flowing. If they've gone down that path, they will usually understand where they are innately stronger. Now, do writers pivot? Absolutely. The more success you have, the easier you can pivot. You can reinvent and recreate yourself. And I think that's part of the beauty of screenwriting is that, yeah, I can tell you everything in the world about how tough it will be for your agent to reframe their understanding of you now that you want to be a comedy writer after you've been a thriller writer. But at the end of the day, you deliver an amazing comedy script, nobody's going to get in your way. So writers have the power and the ability to reinvent themselves by just doing the work.
Okay, so let's go on. The next chapter is, and I think essentially a lot of these meetings, these general meetings that someone is going to get is going to be through their agent or manager. So let's go on to the next chapter about getting an agent. First, maybe you can just describe the difference between an agent and manager, and then we can kind of move in from there.
Sure. So let's start with managers because they're really on the forefront of talent discovery today. They are, in many ways, and the younger managers, not all of them, are the talent scouts for writers of the industry today. Agents are really there to book revenue, to sell the client, to pay for the client, to follow the money. That is their job. Managers, in a more traditional sense, and of course there are exceptions, are more there to help with development, to help massage relationships, to manage the day-to-day of the writer. Now, not all managers develop, but they are expected to be more hands-on than the agent, who is there purely for business opportunities.
Okay. And then from there, maybe you can just talk about, so it sounds like your advice is maybe getting a manager first to help with the younger writer, to help them develop some material, and then they can go out to the agent. So maybe the first step would be, how do you approach managers? What's your recommendation for that?
So managers, they're always, the great thing about managers, because they're not licensed, there are new ones coming out of the woodwork all the time. You can wear that moniker without a lot of prerequisites. So that means
for better or for worse.
Better or for worse.
Yeah.
But that means that a lot more young managers are joining the game and looking for clients than young agents who have to go through the mailroom and then get hired by an agency, et cetera, et cetera. So you really want to look to where they are looking as far as how to gain their attention. I think high-end contests are great. There's 5 or 6 of them that managers and agents traditionally judge the final round. So all the finalists are getting read by judges. And also, like, if you quarterfinal and nickel, you're going to get a call from a few managers. If you semi, definitely. Because these are people who are building their list. So they're looking at contests as vetting services to start understanding who are the writers I should be reading right now. I love targeted query letters. I think targeted queries can go a long way. You simply have to collect the information about who they are, why you're approaching them, be really methodical and thoughtful about it. The Blacklist has done a great job connecting writers with managers, also Stage 32s and roadmap writers, online pitches. There are more ways now to get out there than I think there have been for some years. The challenge is that managers typically read so much that it's tough for them to get excited. So they really are looking for that diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, the other way and the most popular way is referrals, right? This is a referral business. So if you're able to generate a referral from somebody who's repped by that manager, from somebody who knows that manager, that is going to really break down a lot of walls for you, and that they will likely at least pay attention, give you a read, and see where it takes them.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe there's some general tips in writing this chapter. You interviewed a lot of agents and managers. Maybe you can talk about specifically what they're looking for. Was there anything that stuck out?
They're looking for people who are not treating this as a second option or the second job. This is really the first job. This is the priority, even if they're not getting paid for it right now. So they're looking for writers who are very serious, writers who know how to take notes. Writers who don't have a lot of trust issues. So I've definitely got some pushbacks of, if a writer will not sign a release form, I know I don't want to work with them because that's already a sign of mistrust and the relationship hasn't even started. I've also gotten things that are as simple as just tell writers not to be weird. We want to work with people that we like. We want to have a good, positive relationship, but we want to work with somebody who knows how to take notes. We want to work with somebody who is able to churn in new material at some sort of a regular clip. We want to work with somebody who can work collaboratively with us as opposed to just tell us why we're wrong. Somebody that we're excited to put in a room, somebody that we know we can put in a room and nobody will call us and say, oh my God, why did you send me this person? What is wrong with you? Because you have to remember that for agents and managers, them putting you in the room is their reputation. It's not your reputation separate from theirs. It's they chose to invest their time and energy in you. And so you're effectively extending their own brand as they send you out there. So they want you to present well. They want you to be very researched. And I've talked to managers who've said, I want my writers to take acting classes because if they're nervous in a room, I need them to figure out how to come out of their shell for half an hour. So they're looking to see all of those things that make a writer good on the page and good in a room.
Okay. And maybe you can just talk briefly about what writers can expect, especially newer writers can expect from that first agent or manager.
From a manager, if it's somebody who is young and hungry, hopefully they're going to get a lot of input into next project. What are you developing next? What are you thinking about doing? How are we doing that? Let's go through ideas together. Potentially the manager may be a little bit over involved because it's the first time they're developing with that writer. So they're going to be very, very thoughtful about what is the next thing, what is the next thing to take you to market with. If it's going to be a busier manager, there's going to be significantly less time and attention because ultimately that manager, and it's true for agents as well, they have their earners and those are the people they have to work for. They have to make sure that those people are working first before they extend any energy to writers who are not earning them money yet. I find that with most agents, and it's not true across the board because there are agents who see taking on younger writers as a project. And so you will see very high up agents in top agencies, definitely the big four, who will take on a young writer and put in a lot of time and energy because, frankly, they can. You're not going to see that across the board with an agent. An agent is only going to call when there's an opportunity. They're not going to. I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, well, why can't I get my team to update me about who they sent what to and when and why? And ultimately, they're not going to do that because that's taking time away from booking revenue. So agents are going to, most of the time, be limited to the most specific communication, only when necessary. Managers are going to be more hands-on, and the degree of hands-on really depends on where the manager is in his or her career.
Yeah, and I just wonder if you can speak to kind of expectations. I find a lot of new writers, they think that getting this first manager is kind of, they've crossed the finish line, and I think that maybe you can speak to that a little bit just in terms of like once you get that first manager, how long until you like realistically can be making a living as a writer? It's certainly not going to be a day or a week or probably a month, but what do you typically see?
Listen, it certainly can take time. I think the latest trend is for an aspiring TV writer, an emerging TV writer, to get a manager and have the manager say to them at the third or fourth meeting when the writer says, great, you love my pilot, I'm working on a new one, and we're also excited, what about staffing? To which the manager will turn around and say, oh, no, you're responsible for getting yourself your first job. I'm not responsible for staffing you. It's too hard to staff one writer. I'm a manager. I'm not an agency. I don't do that. So, I've seen writers go years and years and years with a team, potentially with an agent, with a manager on them, before starting to generate some revenue. I've seen it go faster, and by faster I mean a 12-month cycle, an 8-month cycle, before we end up with revenue coming in. But certainly it's only the beginning of the hard work, and that's, for me, and in my mind, that is when the pressure really heightens, because you have somebody now waiting on you, and you are contending with their entire list for their attention. And you want to be top of mind, and you want to be the first writer that they're talking about when they're sitting down to lunch, and the writers they're excited about. So you have to be generating that content. You have to be generating leads. You have to be out networking, meeting people, so you can call back to your manager and say, I met this particular executive at a party. Can you please send the material? So you're going to have to impress and work harder once you're repped. The idea that, the hard work is done and you did that part is not necessarily true to form. What is true is that you're going to have more advocates who are known to the space speaking your name. And that's where potentially more doors will open, but you'll have to work harder to ram through them and get the attention.
Yeah. I'm curious, you keep mentioning generating a lot of material. Most of the people, I would assume, that are trying to break into the industry probably have full lives outside of screenwriting, whether that be a full-time job or a full-time family or stuff. How much material do you think is realistic for someone to generate at the beginning of their career when they're still working another job? Maybe TV pilots versus feature specs. Maybe you can give some guidelines there. Because again, I feel like the emails I get from people, they are grossly underestimating how much they should be producing during this time where they're trying to get into the industry.
Listen, in a perfect world, and I don't think this world exists, I would love to see 1 to 2 features a year, at least 2 pilots. Is that necessarily realistic? No. Would I be content with a really great feature a year? Absolutely, but it has to be great. Would I be as content with a feature every 2 or 3 years? No, I wouldn't. Because ultimately, if your manager is not hearing from you for 2 or 3 years with new work, they've forgotten about it. They've gotten excited about so many new writers since they've signed you. It's going to be really hard to get them to read you with any priority, to get notes quickly, to move things along. So you have to show your agent or your manager that you are working as hard as they are, and then some, in order to make sure that they keep working for you. And like I said, you are competing with the rest of their list. The bigger the list, the higher the competition. And you have to keep them excited about you.
Yeah. So the next chapter you have in your book is screenwriting competitions, and I wonder if we can just talk about that for a minute. Again, I get a lot of emails on this, and sometimes I'm not always sure how to answer them, and so I'd be curious to get your take on it. I guess maybe to start, maybe you can just give us kind of your overall take on screenwriting competitions.
So as I mentioned earlier, screenwriting competitions are really vetting services for the industry, right? So they are the way for managers to say, and agents to say, and producers to say, 8,000 scripts got entered into Nickel. What's the 150 I should read? 150 is a much more digestible proposition than 8,000. And so they're looking to known contests that have been able to surface material previously in order to find the next bit of material. So I'm sure you heard about this. There was just a big success story off of the Launchpad competition. Marion, that made top 25, just sold in a big splashy spec sale before the winner was even announced. We had the same story happen a couple of years ago with Eric Koenig and his script Matriarch. So the industry really looks to these entities that have been able to surface material and or writers who've gone on to some level of success for finding new writers. And so at the end of the day, while the space is saturated and there's hundreds of contests in it, it really is about finding the contests where known industry individuals are going to be reading the material. It's not about the financial prize. It's about exposure. It's about access. So I like the contests where you see real success stories. And if you don't see real success stories, you see real meetings with real people as part of the prize. Tracking B, as it was building its way up for years, made it its mission to pair each one of their winners with representation. That was their cause. Since then, we've had Extent and other material that surfaced through their contest. So we're past that now. But they really are just vetting services for the industry. That they serve the writer, and that it gives those who qualify a significant amount of exposure and some level of pedigree, a door opener, should they choose to query, should they choose to ask for referrals. Hey, I just won this contest. I was a finalist in a big contest. But they also serve the industry in surfacing to the industry writers that are, in the contest's humble opinion, worthwhile of attention.
Yeah. And you have a list where you actually mention a few contests. I have a similar list on my blog. I'll link to that, but people can definitely check out your book for the contests that you recommend. And one of the big questions I always get is, hey, is this contest, the Joe Blow screenwriting contest in Omaha, is this worth entering? And I'm always torn because in a lot of cases I feel like they may only get 25 scripts that are entered, so your chances of winning are actually probably pretty good. But what's your take on some of the smaller, lesser known contests?
Listen, I think they're great for an ego boost, and I'm not saying that in a condescending fashion. I actually mean that. I think it's great to know that of 100 scripts entered, yours was the best one. I think it's a great start, and you should do it with that in mind if you have the money to spare. I don't think that, I know for a fact that it has no bearings on the industry, and to take it even further, if you come in and you say, I just won, the top prize in the Oklahoma screenwriting contest, and I was, the best script of 99, the industry is going to say, I don't care. Go win the nickel, and then we'll talk. So you also have to understand what is enough of a triumph for you versus what is enough of a triumph to impress the industry. Both are fine and valid. You simply have to understand that while one may feel great to you, it's not going to have any bearings on the industry. The industry is looking for the big fish in the big pond.
Yeah. So let's talk about the television programs. Just in reading through some of the bios of the screenwriters that you interviewed, it seems like a lot of them have broken in through these television writing programs. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can kind of describe how they work, and then we can talk about which ones are worth entering.
The television writing programs are fantastic. I really, really love them because they have an end game, right? The majority of them, specifically the network ones, have a very specific end game, which is get you staffed. And so right now, these programs are growing every day. Film Independent just announced a new episodic lab that is going to be closing next week. We have the majors, NBC, ABC, Warner Brothers, Disney, as well as Fox Diversity. HBO has a fellowship that they run every other year. Sundance, Humanitas. Then we also have Nickelodeon, Cape, and HMC. Most of these are diversity-driven programs, so they're looking to recognize diverse writers. Some of these, like Nickelodeon and ABC Disney, offer pay, but their goal is really to discover the next generation of television writers.
Okay, and are there a couple that you would highly recommend that people enter?
Honestly, I recommend people enter all of them because breaking into television is potentially the hardest thing to do in the industry today, in the sense that what it parlays to is paying work. And because it's so hard, you have to try all the avenues that are available to you. Warner Brothers is considered a bit of a golden ticket. They've certainly been most successful about staffing their writers, but at the same time, if you get into NBC Writers on the Verge, you just won the lottery. Same for ABC Disney, same for Nickelodeon that pays. So I really don't poo-poo any of them. NHMC and CAPE are two smaller fellowships that are diversity specific. So one caters to a Hispanic audience, the other caters to Asian Pacifics. They tend to surface writers for the larger organizations running these programs. So with them, there's not going to be quite so much a direct link into staffing, but it's certainly a great feather to have in your cap and another way in which you get noticed.
And for the most part, are you submitting a original pilot, or are you submitting a spec script of a current show to these things? Do they take either?
It really varies. Each program has their unique specifications. So if you look at the early onset fellowships every year, Sundance, Humanitas, HBO, their original content, that's usually followed by Nickelodeon, which is half-hour specs. And then after that, the networks go for both every shape and size.
Okay. Is there any comedy, drama? Does the contest, are they specific to comedy or drama, or do some of them take both? It's just a matter of...
The only one that only takes comedy is Nickelodeon.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about another chapter you had in your book, Additional Paths to Breaking In, and one of the sections that stood out was web series and short films. And I have a lot of people on that started with short films, so I'm a big proponent of that. And I'd just be curious to kind of get your take on that. Are there some actual examples you can point to for web series where people produced a web series that they wrote and then somehow got staffed or maybe sold a feature or moved along that way?
Listen, the most obvious is Issa Rae, who did Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, who then went on to do Insecure on HBO. After that, we have, De'Ara Kilpatrick did a web series and from there went on to get staffed. We have those stories. The challenge with web today is that it is completely saturated. And so it's very, very tough to make content really surface in the way that we're hoping.
Yeah, I'd say that is a fair assessment. So in your book, you interviewed a bunch of screenwriters. I wonder if there's any stories that particularly stand out as good illustrations of how a writer could potentially break into the industry.
It's funny, and I selected all these writers for different reasons, and I'm a fan of all of theirs, and many I've known personally for a long time. So it's kind of hard to pick your favorite.
Okay.
But the one story that I really particularly love, let's talk for a second about what I love in the overall of all of their stories and why I've picked all of them, because I found all of them to be very hardworking, very determined, very diligent. Nobody broke overnight. People talk about going back 6, 7, 8, 10 years to putting in hard work and not relenting and not giving up. And being methodical and thoughtful. The one story that I particularly love, and it was actually the last story that I added to the collection of writers that I interviewed, was a writer by the name of Moises Zamora, who is a longtime friend and client of mine, who got staffed about a month before I had to turn the book into the publisher. So the interviews had been done. It was me just putting the finishing touches on, and friend we had in common who is interviewed for the book said to me, you have to include him now. And I said, yes, I know, but I have no space and I have to move everything around. And I moved everything around because Moises is a 1-hour drama writer who came to LA and had been in LA for a long time, was actually a novelist in Mexico, and a documentary filmmaker. He came to LA with a determination to write for television. So took a lot of classes, did everything that people tell you to do. And one of them was networking, and he didn't network all the time. He wasn't the guy that was like, every night you're going to find him partying up at some event. But he was very methodical about his networking. And at some point he got a manager and he had a pilot go out there, and he took a lot of meetings, but nothing came of it. Around the same time, he went to a panel of Latina writers in television and really connected with one of the writers. They've kept in touch over social media, but Moises was very clear about, I don't want to ask anybody for favors. And so some months later, he found out that same writer, Davy Perez, was teaching a class at Writing Pad, a preparation class for the fellowships. And so Moises decided to take the class because, okay, this way I can put my material in front of Davy, and I'm not asking anybody for favors. Now, Moises is an exceptionally good writer. He put his stuff in front of Davy, and Davy quickly responded, read Moises's material and said, I might know something for you. Let me send the material in. Didn't really say very much about the what and the where and the why of it. But a couple of weeks later, Moises was on the phone with John Ridley talking about staffing on the third season of American Crime. Went on to staff on that all on his own. Of course, his manager was at his side and doing some of the grunt work of calling and following up and making sure and whatnot. And now Moises just got staffed on the next season of Star. So I love that particular story because it's a story of a writer who didn't wait for anybody, who took every initiative, who networked smart, who wrote smart, got out there and got working. And I love that story because it's an unconventional story, but it reminds you that every writer's path is different. And because of that, you have to continue to search for yours.
Yeah, yeah. And so are there any threads? It sounds like one of my questions was going to be, are there any common threads that didn't surprise you throughout these stories? And it sounds like hard work and persistence and dedication was a big one. But are there any other things that these writers all had in common that you can kind of point to?
These writers all are students of the game, so they know everybody. They've taken every class. They've studied with every instructor. They've met if they're television writers, they met every fellowship director. They've really made a point to read everything, see everything. They watch TV diligently. They read books all the time. They have become experts in their space. And they've been unrelenting about it. Some of them have done it for 6-7 years before making $1. They've continued their ongoing curiosity is really what catapulted them into the room, or while in the room. It's hard work that got them into the room, but it's their natural curiosity and knowledge that ultimately pushed them into a career.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder too, just as someone who consults with a lot of screenwriters, and you just mentioned, sometimes 6-7 years they'll work without making a dime.
Most times.
Yeah, most times, exactly. When is it time for a writer to say, maybe this isn't for me? Is there ever a time, and how does someone make that kind of a decision? What advice do you give people if they're at that point where they've been at this for a number of years and haven't broken in? Maybe just a little advice on that end.
When you think you can be happy elsewhere. If this is your second option, if there's another life that that's available to you in which you're going to be happy or just as happy, go to it. It's probably going to be easy or easier than this. So for me, it's really about you do this as long as this is where your heart sings, right? This is the creation of content. The telling stories in this fashion is what fuels you, and you can't imagine doing anything else. When you can imagine doing something else and you have conviction in the fact that you won't want to come back to this in this form, then certainly go find your happiness. Nobody said that you were born to be a screenwriter. I think we're born to be happy, healthy, contributional individuals on this earth, do more good than bad. But if you find that there's another life that is calling to you that you think you'll be just as happy in, run.
Yeah, good advice. So what's the best way for people to keep up with you? You can mention your Twitter handle, and I'll gather all these things up and put them in the show notes, but maybe you can just tell us about that stuff now. Website, blog, anything you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. So my website, leejessup.com. I blog a lot. I'm also going to start releasing some breaking in videos that I'm very excited about. Some of the writers interviewed for the book, some who have not been, stories of writers breaking in. So that's coming out for me. My Twitter handle is Jessup. All of that is, of course, on my website. On Facebook, I'm Lisa Javi Jessup. There are many different iterations, but I'm not difficult to find. And of course, my website, the easiest, leejessup.com.
Perfect. And maybe you can tell us about your book. Where is that going to be released, and how can people get the book?
The book is actually already out,
okay.
So you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on my website. You can get it at Barnes & Nobles. You can get it on the publisher side, Taylor & Francis, Focal Press. So it's widely available. I know Writer Store stocked it. So it's really everywhere, which is kind of fun.
Yep, it is. So, well, congratulations finishing this book. I wish you a lot of luck with it. Thank you again for coming on and talking with me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. I just want to mention 2 things I'm doing at Selling Your Screenplay to help screenwriters find producers who are looking for material. First, I've created a monthly newsletter that will be sent directly to producers. Every member of the SYS Select community can submit 1 logline per newsletter. I went and emailed my large database of producers and asked them if they would like to receive this monthly newsletter of pitches. So far, I have around 400 producers who have signed up to receive it. These producers are hungry for material and happy to read scripts from new writers. So if you want to participate in this pitch newsletter and get your scripts into the hands of lots of producers, sign up at sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. And secondly, I've partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads sites so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting between 5 and 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These are producers and production companies who are actively looking to buy material or are looking to hire a screenwriter for a specific project. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. These leads run the gamut from production companies looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their own properties. Producers are looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots. It's a huge array of different types of projects and these producers are looking for. And these leads are exclusive to our partner and SYS Select members. To sign up, go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. That's the show. Thank you for listening.